Thank you. Allow me now to express my my thanks. I mean, to you, Taylor, in this double role of preparing the technical side and preparing the, and also presenting to us today. Allow me to introduce Taylor to you just in a few words. She just finished her PhD, and for those of you who are just beginning or are halfway, it's so encouraging to meet someone who has finished and who has survived and who is now turns into a new phase of her life to share with others what she has learned, and also in terms of her research to share it with the wider world. Taylor has been part and is part of many different worlds. She was born in the United States, but when you look at her bio and at her website, you will notice that she has lived and made in other places and made many other places in the world her home. And part of her life is connected to Africa. She has lived in a number of African countries, as you will notice. So she is part of many worlds. And in those different worlds, she has met with the complexity of how mission organizations from Western countries collaborate with local churches. And she has made that her research topic. It's this topic of her research, focusing on Africa, is of great relevance to us here in Central and Eastern Europe. And as you now share, Taylor, with us about your PhD journey, about your methodology. I mean, you defended your PhD at not an everyday university, at this big University of South Africa, a distance learning university with more than 400,000 students. And she was one of them. But this was also the university with its mission department, where David Bosch, we all know him so well. He worked there for many years. And so did Professor Clippy Skritzinger, who was the supervisor of Taylor and who is an honorary member of CEEAMS. So Taylor, we welcome you in your capacity as a doctor, Taylor, tenure, then you're now sharing with you your research. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, for your generous introduction, and hello all. I have made some slides because when you talk about something you're passionate about, but for me, I could talk all day, so I use the slides to keep me in line. Can everyone see it? Anne-Marie, can everyone see my slides now?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
So, again, I am Taylor Denyer, and I did my doctorate research at the University of South Africa on decolonizing mission partnerships. Oh, let's see. It's never done that to me before. Ah, there we go. So, a bit about my doctoral journey. I applied to the doctorate program in the winter of 2013. I was living in Djibouti, which is east of Ethiopia, with my husband and our young daughter, who was just starting to walk and talk. I did not officially graduate until 2019. In that process, I had moved internationally twice and dealt with the unexpected death of my father. So lots of stuff happened in that process. And the actual thesis publication didn't happen until this past fall. So you can see my daughter grew up a bit in that time period, and my husband grew a pandemic beard. And we're now living in Slovenia. So I want to talk about first what I needed on a pragmatic level to make it through this journey. I needed to have the support and encouragement of friends and family, my parents who would say, you can do it, and my husband who was okay with the fact that we would be living just on his income for quite some time. I needed to have a balance in my life between the time I dedicated for research and writing and the time I had for my day-to-day life and my daily ministries as a pastor. Most of the time of my research, I was living in Algeria, pastoring a congregation there. And I also needed, because of the type of research I was doing with qualitative research interview style, I had to have established relationships and experience. So my focus was on the North Katanga region of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I couldn't just go in and ask questions. I had to already have that established relationship or it wouldn't have worked. So I had a relationship going back many years and had started living there in Katanga in 2005. So you can see that's, I've aged a bit. And then the other thing I needed to do for this to work was I need to engage in deep listening and careful documentation of what I was listening to. One thing that was particularly surprising and interesting to me, since I did a lot of my research in interview style, I did recorded interviews, and then I transcribed those interviews. And what I found was, even though I thought I was listening deeply when I was doing the interviews, I wasn't listening nearly as deeply as I thought I was. I would have interviews where I thought at the end of that interview, wow, that person didn't really say anything important or interesting. And then when I went back and transcribed it and looked, I discovered that actually they were saying quite a bit. And sometimes someone would say something profound with a shrug of their shoulders, as if to say that what they're saying wasn't important, and in fact it was. So all of these combined produced a message worth sharing with the world. And I'm quite proud and humbled that the American Society of Missiology decided to publish my dissertation in their monograph series. So some of my advice from my experience for those on the doctorate journey. 1, a doctorate program in the field of Christian mission is neither a sprint nor is it a marathon. I see it as a pilgrimage. It's going to take you up and down mountains and through wilderness. And yes, you'll get those freshwater springs, and it will transform you in the process. So if you have entered onto this doctorate journey just because you think it'd be cool to have the title of doctor, you may discover that the price is too high for you. Also, your research question needs to be personal. It needs to be the kind of question that sometimes keeps you up at night, the question that gnaws at you, a question that if you could just answer this, it would be of great help to you and others, guiding you in how to be a more faithful and fruit-bearing disciple. I say this for 2 reasons. One is, if the research question is something that is a question that personally drives you, it's overall going to be a better research question. And also, this journey is long. If you pick a question just because it seems like, oh, there's a question I can research, you're going to get so sick of this question that you'll probably quit before you end your journey. That said, while it's tempting to tackle big questions, don't let your hubris set you up for failure. When I started my doctoral research, I had these grand ideas of the questions I was going to ask and solve. And, first it was, I wanted to talk about decolonizing mission partnerships globally. And then it was, okay, I want to talk about the North Katanga conference, and I want to analyze the relationship dynamics with North Katanga conference and the rest of the United Methodist Church over its entire history. And thank goodness I had Clippy's as my advisor, and he said, no, Taylor, that's too big. You've put too much on your plate. You need to trim it down. So I had to trim mine all the way down to what started as a huge question. It went down to, okay, I want to look at North Katanga, United Methodist North Katanga conference leaders, their relationship with American United Methodist leaders over the past 2 decades. So it went huge and then went tiny, and even that was a very large bite. So you're going to have to make it smaller. And remember that you are part of a family of researchers. So I don't know about the church you come from. I come from a church that loves pitch-in dinners. We have a meal, everybody brings their dish, and then together we eat a feast. Don't try to cook up the feast for the whole celebration. Just bring your dish to contribute, and that will be part of the feast for all. That's why we're a community here. So next, I want to transition, and I guess we'll ask, I'm not paying attention to the chat box, so Anne-Marie, if there's any questions that people pop on and you want me to pause and talk, or if anyone wants to pause and talk, just let me know. I want to introduce you to the 7-point Praxis Flower. There are a number of variations on this Praxis matrix. This is the one that Clippy's developed, and it's the one that the University of South Africa's missiology department asks all of its doctoral students to use. And Anne-Marie tells me that it's a bit foreign in in your part of the world. So I thought it would be good to just introduce it as a possible structure for your analysis and your chapters. So the Praxis Flower is a way to, how would you say, itemize or dissect a question. So when you ask a question, these are different aspects that you should ask. And once we have asked all of those questions, the intersection point is spirituality. So I want to give you some concrete examples from my research. So my overarching question was, what would a decolonized partnership look like between North Katangan and American United Methodists? Then using this matrix, I started asking sub-questions that could be explored. So the discernment for action, and want to pause and say, one of the things about praxis matrices is that they keep going. So discernment for action, you ask that question initially, and then at the end, you can ask that question again, and things keep moving. So I wanted to start on discernment for action on what actions had already been taken, what had already been discerned for action. So what have been the mission activities done in relationship between North Katangans and Americans since the mid-1990s? What initiatives are currently underway and what others are envisioned? What have been the underlying goals of each of these activities? And what processes have been used to create and lead these activities? Next, we have contextual understanding. So I asked, how do the agents understand the cultural, socio-political, economic, and religious context of their mission? What were the problems that they addressed and prioritized in their mission, such as poverty, unbelief, violence, traditional beliefs, illiteracy, tribalism, ministerial training? So what was their context and their understanding of their context? Ecclesial scrutiny. How do the partners understand the nature and purpose of the church? What are their thoughts on issues of authority in the church? And are there significant differences in their views of the church's role in society? So this is the area where we ask the question, what role is the church playing? How do we assess what the church is doing? Since I was asking interviews, I wanted to ask each person, well, what do you think about the church's role in this overall question? Then we have interpreting the tradition. And because we're coming from a Christian tradition, adding in the what scripture passages and theological themes do the people I'm interviewing identify when discussing their mission relationship? How do these themes influence their understanding? So what are the traditions? What are the traditional beliefs? What are the traditional practices? How do we use tradition to interpret the overarching question? And then for me, this one was really important in my research, which is agency, which is another way of saying who has power, who has agency, who has power, who has the authority to make decisions, the authority to change things, do things, manipulate things, who has a seat at the table. So I wanted to ask the questions, who are the decision makers and the power holders? And as I was looking over a period of time in evolution, who were those people? And what were the features of their theology and beliefs? Who was left out of this process? So who didn't have agency? And what changes have occurred in the area of agency? Who has power? Who doesn't have power? Who makes decisions? Who doesn't make decisions? And then I was looking for patterns and trends in the area of agency. Then we've got reflexivity. So this is where we ask the questions of how do the people involved in this situation reflect about what's going on? How do they see it? How have they learned? How have they interpreted? And can they identify their own self-interest and biases? What are they aware of and what hasn't occurred to them? In mine, I included, because I was looking at partnership dynamics, I included the question, well, what do you think about the concept of a missionary moratorium? So these are the questions one asks. So all of those 6 questions intersect in the questions about spirituality. So where is the Holy Spirit in this? how is this understood? And with my interview participants, I wanted to know, are there differences between the spiritualities and understandings of the Americans and the Katangans in the partnership? So that's, Anne-Marie, do we have any questions or things you think that should be clarified on that? I know that's a whole bunch all at once.
I suggest that you first continue, Taylor,
Okay.
and for all of us, if we do have questions, that we write them in the chat and we can pick them up then later. But please continue and with your presentation.
So, searching for answers to all of these questions. First, need to establish which conversation you're joining, which academic conversation group you're joining. For me, I decided it was Decolonizing Mission Partnerships. So my first chapter was my dissertation was my introduction. My second chapter, which you could call the literature review, focused on those three terms: decolonizing, mission, and partnerships. So those were the three scholarly areas that I dove into in my reading. I wanted to know what is being said and what has been said on the topic of colonialism, neocolonialism, and decolonization, especially in the church, but not limited to the church. Mission. I wanted to read everything I could find about what does mission mean? And what should it mean? And are we misusing the word, or all of that? So that's a big conversation. So I did lots of reading on that topic. And then finally, the topic of partnerships. I read other people's dissertations that have been just on the topic of partnerships. So everything I could find and read on the question about partnerships. What does that mean? And does it mean what we think it means? And are we doing what we say we're doing? And what are the complexities of partnerships? One of the big questions that arose I found in the conversation around partnerships is, are partnerships even possible when you're dealing with two communities with vastly different histories, vastly different socioeconomic situations? Is it possible to have a true, balanced, healthy partnership? So those are the big questions. So chapter 2 of my dissertation was just on those three questions and what other scholars have said about it. Because that would then inform what research I would do and what I would contribute to the overall conversation. Then the question was, am I going to do qualitative or quantitative research? For me, it was pretty clear. For some people, you're not sure on it. But for me, it was clear I needed to do qualitative research, partly because I knew I wasn't going to get the sample size I needed to have data that could really mean something. And I do suggest if your program doesn't offer the class, find a class on qualitative and quantitative research methods and understand the difference and the pros and cons. Read some books on that. So for me, I decided that was what was most important to me wasn't something that could be measured numerically, because what I cared about was perceptions. It was more important to me to know what are the different perceptions than who thinks more than that, because I knew that the kind of research I would need to do to be able to say, 50% of North Katangans believe that was not feasible. So I wanted to do qualitative, and I wanted to do interviews, as well as read all the publications I could find on the topic of relationships with North Katanga United Methodists. And one of the things I was dealing in my topic was there's not been that much published. So it actually was possible for me to read pretty much every single thing that had been published on that topic, because there wasn't much of it. So for the interview part, I did loosely structured interviews with the questions were guided by that Praxis Flower, those categories. So I wanted to touch upon each of those categories in my conversations. I started with a list of interview questions, but I wasn't a prisoner to those questions. So as I started doing the interviews, things that I would notice and discover in an interview, I would then incorporate in the questions I would ask other people. So for example, very early in my interviews, I noticed something that when I was interviewing North Katangans, semantics mattered. If I asked them a question about the relationship between North Katangans and Americans, I would get a very flat, politically correct answer. Intellectual, emotionally flat answer. But if I change the question and instead of saying North Katangan and American, I said North Katangan's relationship with Mzungus, which Mzungu is a word roughly translated to white people, kind of like a gringo, or it's an emotionally loaded word. And what I found was that the answers I would get to those questions were not only different in content, they were different in energy level. And once I noticed this, I thought, oh, okay, I've got to shift my interview questions. And so from then on out, every interview I did, I would start with the language of Katangan and American. And then after people answer those questions, I would shift and start using the word Mzungu. And I started asking people, well, what does a Mzungu mean? What does that word? And the richness that came out of that was so important that I ended up dedicating a huge chunk of one of my chapters just to Mzungu. And what does it mean to have a relationship with a Mzungu, and the changing views of what Mzungu means. Again, like I said, so don't be a prisoner to your questions. Allow yourself to shift the questions a bit. And then, as I said, I went and I reviewed and analyzed all the published materials I could find. One of the problems I had was that the published materials were almost entirely written by Americans for American audiences. North Katangans themselves had written very little and published even less, which had a lot to do with access to paper, pen, storage facilities where what you write doesn't get lost, and access to computers, other devices, and just general time in the day. It takes a lot of time. You have to have leisure time in order to write big things. So for this reason, in my interviews, I did not do an equal number of Americans and North Katangans. I deliberately chose to do most of my interviews with North Katangans and then did a handful of American interviews to get a contrast perspective. The other important thing, and this is something that Clippy's taught me when I was doing the interviews, and I asked Clippy's, well, how many people should I interview? And he said, it's not a matter of how many people, it's a matter of data saturation. So you ask 10 people and you get different answers, 11 people, you keep getting different answers. When I got to 25 people, I discovered that I was pretty much getting the same answers now, that I wasn't getting any new answers, new perspectives. And so I concluded that I felt comfortable saying that I had now established all of the major perspectives on these questions that existed. Might there be perspectives out there that I didn't hear? Yes, of course. But whatever they weren't perspectives that were the dominant perspectives. The other suggestion I have is agree with your faculty advisor on a draft chapter structure before you go too deeply into your research phase. Again, you're not a prisoner of this chapter structure. It can change, it can move around. Mine did. As I learned new things, I would say, oh, this actually needs to be its own chapter. In my research, I ended up discovering that I needed to have a whole chapter just dedicated to racism and trauma. That wasn't in the original plan, but it came out and it became its own chapter. That said, if I hadn't already had a structure in my mind, oh man, that would have been a nightmare trying to then take all of this stuff and put it in a structure. It was good to already know, okay, I'm going to talk about this, and then I'm going to explore this and this, which is why the flower was useful, because then I could, each petal of the flower could be its own chapter or portion of a chapter. Yes, and note that the chapters may change. Also, I would say, remember that even jazz musicians and improv actors rely on a structure. Even improvisational preachers who think they fully improv rely on a structure. So a structure is your friend. A structure will get you through this process. So those were my main talking points that I wanted to share, and I'd like to leave this rest of the time open for a conversation.
Thank you very much, Taylor, for your clear presentation. But I'm quite sure that there are certain terms or matters that are in need of clarification. So I first would like to open the floor for questions of clarification, and feel free to put them in the chat if you like. But well, who would like to start with simple questions of clarification? Who would like to start? Yes, Daniela, maybe you have a question of clarification? Or Miroslav, I see that you are preparing a question. Okay, you're in the office, you can't. Oh, good. Miroslav.
Feel free to type something.
Oh, yes.
Speak aloud.
Thank you for presentation. I enjoy in your book or in your dissertation because I have opportunity to read it. It helped you because you was involved in with all these people before you was also, you know, all these people that help you, or how, because you probably have some prejudice or some, you know, some answers, how that help you or not help you be a researcher in this area, how to be objective or.
Thank you for that question. And it's a very good one. I think objectivity is a myth. It is good to try in some way to be objective, but I think it's more honest if we name our biases. So you may have noticed that there was a section in my introduction, and it's actually a required component for the UNISA missiology department that you name your biases, you name the things that are going to influence your perspective. So, so yeah, did I go into this research with some ideas and some biases? Yes, of course. It's impossible not to. But I tried to name them. I tried to be aware of them. I tried to check them and critique myself. But as I said before, I do not think I would have gotten the quality and honesty of answers that I would have gotten from my participants if I didn't already have a relationship with them. Almost everyone I interviewed was someone who I had known for quite some time. And the couple of exceptions were people who, the people I'd interviewed said, you know, if you're really serious about this, here's this person you need to talk to. So there were two retired clergy, the two oldest living retired clergy of North Katanga that people knew of. And I'd never met them because they were so old, they were retired before I'd come on the scene. And they said, no, Taylor, you need to meet them. But then someone who I had an established relationship with, a pastor who I already knew, took me to the house of those two men, introduced me to them. And because of those trust that was existing between those two men, then there could be trust to talk to me. And so then we could have those conversations. Now that said, the other thing I had to deal with was because I'd had so many conversations with people in the past, I noticed when what they said on their recorded interview didn't match what they had told me confidentially, or not necessarily didn't match, but didn't go as far. That they would still, because they knew they were being recorded, because they knew that these words might end up in a book, they weren't going to say as much. And so that was another challenge I had. And you probably noticed this as well in some of the sections in my chapter where I had to go, okay, so I did all these interviews and there's this thing that no one mentioned in the interview, but I know they're all thinking about it because they've told me about it before. So for one of the issues was the question that in the relationship between Americans and North Katangans, the fundraising had plummeted in recent years. Americans just were not sending money like they were before. And so I'd be asking everyone the question, well, what's going on there? Why is that? And people weren't willing to say what I think everyone actually knew was the underlying problem. And because nobody wanted to go there. They would give, well, it could be this, it could be that. And they might say, well, maybe there's trust issues. Again, as a researcher, what do you do with that? When you know that there's actually things that people think, but nobody's going to say that in the interview. So that was a challenge as well. I'm not sure if this fully answers your question, other than be honest with the fact that you can't be objective, and be honest with the fact that it's messy, and don't pretend that things are clean, because that's dishonest.
I think Father Evangelist has a question related to this. He writes in the chat, thank you for the wonderful presentation and the excellent work you produced. What were your main concerns as you went on, especially because you took longer from where you started and when you ended your work? Father Evangelist, would you like to comment on your comments some more in person?
He might be having.
I thank you very much. I realized that Taylor used a lot of her personal experience in her work, and that's very impressive. And I was wondering what she was going through, because many students, as they go through their doctoral works, they have a lot of challenges in other issues that have nothing to do with their education that affects them. And sometimes they don't see those issues as necessary to discuss them with their supervisors, with their colleagues. And I was wondering what your experience was. And secondly, now that I have a chance to speak, I can ask my second question. You deal with partnerships and issues of mission. And actually, having published on these issues and having worked on them, power is a central issue. And I have not necessarily heard you speak much about it. Of course, you are not speaking about your content per se, but maybe that's something. And two, did you not fear that if you disconnect these dependencies, say, for example, of the Katangas from the American missionaries, if that would have adverse negative effect on their day-to-day mission because they are not yet sustainable, and how that would hurt them? I ask this because I went through this kind of psychological traumas as I did mine. But I would like to hear your points. Thank you. And thank you very much for your wonderful presentation and your excellent work.
Thank you. Those are a number of really great questions. I'll see if I can hold them all in my head. Someone, if I forget one of the questions, someone please remind me. So one, the question of power. I talked a lot about power in my dissertation. I didn't talk about it much in the presentation because I was trying to focus more on the process of writing than the content of my research. But yes, I talk a lot about power issues and power imbalances and power struggles in my dissertation. Next, yes, because my dissertation did take several years, I did have the challenge of the challenge / temptation of constantly updating things. And you have to, and you have to at some point do a cutoff point because things were changing in the partnership, new things were happening. And so I wanted to incorporate, and I said, no, like anything that happens after this cutoff date, we're not gonna really talk about because you'll just never finish. You'll never finish because you're constantly revising. So yeah, at some point you just have to hit a cutoff date and say, everything that happens after this date, that's for another research project, that's for another paper. The question about things happening in my personal life. Again, I was very lucky to have a compassionate and understanding advisor in Clippy's Kissinger. So for example, when my father had a heart attack and died, I had to put my doctorate process really on hold for about a year to focus on dealing with all the family fallout and all the other things. So, and yeah, that can be a challenge. If you just put everything on a table and come back to it a year later, it can be hard to get back into it. And honestly, there were moments where I was about to quit. And my husband was like, Taylor, you're this close to finishing. Do you really think you should quit now? So yeah, especially in a doctoral research that spans over a number of years, you're going to have a lot of personal things come up. And it's okay to set things aside and come back to it. And I think it's especially helpful to make sure your advisor knows. So if I'd been silent, Clippies would have thought, oh, she's, what happened? She's vanished. She's ghosted me. But I said to Clippies, look, my father died. There's a lot of stuff going on in the family. I need to take a break. And he said, take a break. So it's not unprofessional to take a break.
Taylor, maybe for a moment, just to stop, we have a few minutes left.
Okay.
And I suggest that you continue the conversation directly with Father Evangelist on some of the issues. I think that might result in a very interesting connection between the two of you. But Ruslan, I wonder whether from your Central Asian perspective, your research perspective, you have a question of clarification of please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tyler. That was a really wonderful presentation. and I'm not familiar with the content, of your dissertation, but I was very impressed how you put everything, because it's very important for me personally to try to discern what kind of journey is waiting for me, because I'm from very beginning still be. And so I don't think from that perspective I have any question for clarification. And especially I just want to say thank you for your honest answers and responses for the question about interviewing. There is a huge struggle for us as well, and especially this question when you have a relationship with people. That might be another question which is not a question for clarification. Have you been experienced the kind of impact in relationship with the people after interview? So not the connection between interview itself and your relationship before, but what are some kind of consequences? Did you experience that consequences of because you took some interview or you discuss with these people really hot topics? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. So I'll answer it indirectly, in that one of the challenges I faced, I had to wrestle with, which was, so it's easy to take an article or something written by a complete stranger and critique it and say, here's where they're wrong, and here's where they're being racist, and here's this and that. But if you're taking something that someone you have a relationship with, someone who interviewed, trusting that because of your relationship, you're not going to use this to harm them or publicly humiliate them, then how do you balance that friendship with your scholarship? If they say something and you're like, ooh, dude, that's really racist. How do you say in your book that this person said something racist when they're your friend and you don't want to hurt them? I hope, my prayer is that I balanced things, that I didn't, some might say that I pulled punches. I'm not sure. I think I put it all out there. A lot of times what I did was I put things and did sort of the Jesus method of those who have ears will hear. Those who have ears will see what I just put in front of them. And so, yes, just to say, yeah, that's an issue. It's a challenge.
Thank you very much, Taylor. Unfortunately, our time is over. It's 1 o'clock. But the good thing is that we have a summer ODC coming where we welcome you, each one of you. Taylor will be there part of the time as well. And that's the possibility to continue the conversation much more in depth than we did today. But thank you very much, Taylor, for your clear presentation and the clarity on methodology and your struggle to limit your topic in time and in space. I think it's something we all recognize very well. I thank you for the presentation, and I thank each one of you for your for being present. And do not hesitate to reach out to Taylor to continue this conversation afterwards. I'm sure Taylor is available to walk with you. And yes, do not hesitate to register for the summer ODC. We really hope that it is possible, and it seems to be possible, that we can meet again also in Osijek, physically. So please do come, but we also will have satellite location meetings and places set up in Almaty, in hopefully in Kiev, hopefully in St. Petersburg and in Chisinau, all depending the COVID situation. So thank you very much, Taylor. Thank you all for being present and praying for you for health and for perseverance and for life in the spirits, being filled, being renewed day by day as we celebrate Pentecost. Blessings to you all. Bye-bye.
And yes, you have my CEEAMS email address, so write me, and Roman, feel free to write me with your question and we can chat.
Thank you very much, and God bless, and greetings to your families as far as we know them. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.